Okay.
Welcome to the Delight in the Limelight live stream show. I'm your host, Linda Ugolo, a speaking confidence coach, author of the book, Delight in the Limelight, and the host of the Delight in the Limelight podcast. I and my guests are here to help you transform your experience of speaking from dread to loving it instead, whether that's on the stage or on camera, in the media, or in the meeting room. And today we're talking about shining the light on underrepresented voices. Have you ever felt invisible or marginalized at work, where you had to hide a part of yourself, where you feel you didn't belong? Maybe you hide or downplay a piece of your identity to fit in. Look, we all want to belong, but not for who we aren't, but who we are. Maybe you're a manager wanting to empower each member of your team. Well, here to discuss all of this today with me is Tricia Montalvo Timm. Tricia is a board director, venture investor, speaker, and author. She's a first generation Latina whose law career spanned from working with some of the most well-known publicly traded multinational companies to stepping on as the first lawyer at several high-tech startups or high-growth startups. She rose through the ranks of Silicon Valley, advising high-tech companies, big and small, culminating in the sale of a data analytics company, Looker, to Google for $2.6 billion. In her new book, Embrace the Power of You, she seeks to inspire those who have felt like other in the workplace, how to own your identity at work, show up as your authentic self, and how that leads to the real success you may be seeking. Welcome, Tricia.
Oh, thank you, Linda. I'm so excited to be here with you.
I'm excited too. I have just adored your book, Embrace the Power of You. And even though, I check off the box of white when filling out any kind of information, I really related to so much of what you were speaking about. And I think it's a very powerful book for all of us who want to be our authentic self. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually hearing that a lot from people, that talks a lot about my own story of being a first generation Latina. But anybody can be another. It can be economic class, sexual orientation, sexual identity, it can be learning difference. It could be anxiety, on so many different things that we try to keep hidden because we don't want to be judged. So I think everybody could relate for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm wondering, do you feel that, like, were you aware when you were hiding parts of yourself that you were hiding parts of yourself? Like, did it become normalized? So you,
Yeah.
or was it? So I'm just wondering, because do people need to recognize or be helped to recognize the ways that they're hiding themselves?
That's a great question. I think it's different for everyone. For me, I did not really recognize I was doing that. And so I think the book really takes a reader on that journey and has a lot of self reflection moments, because they were the sort of self reflection moments I had to do as I was sort of unpacking my life. But for me, I started hiding at a young age, and that was as a result of where I came from. My parents are first generation. I'm sorry, they're immigrants. My dad is from Ecuador. My mother's from El Salvador. And I grew up in Los Angeles, and they wanted the American dream like most immigrants want. And they took us out of the city into the suburbs. And all of a sudden, I found myself as the only Latina in a predominantly white community. And they were discriminated against. They had thick Spanish accents. So they didn't want the same thing for me. So out of love, they encouraged me, it's best if people don't know where you're from, assimilate, blend in. It's going to be much easier for you here in the United States if you're just if you're American, quote. And so I started doing that at a pretty young age. And then all of a sudden, it's just what was my normal without realizing what I was doing, really.
Yeah, yeah. So just not letting people know about your family, your background, you just didn't speak about it to other people?
Yeah, I didn't speak about it. I didn't talk about where we were from. I straightened my hair because to me, professional hair looked a certain way and it wasn't big and curly. I also, you know, and kind of muted myself, I'll say, especially since we're talking about being visible. You know, as Latinas, or at least me, I'm loud. I have a loud laugh. You know, we're vibrant, and I didn't want to be the loud Latina in the room, so I kind of, you know, brought my voice down, or really was conscious of how loud I was being. So there's just a lot of different aspects about who I was that I was um, downplaying. And then I would say the second part of what I downplayed was being a working mom. When I had my first daughter, in the workplace, I was in a company that did not create an inclusive environment, and it was an all male leadership team, and there were no women in leadership. No, at the time, this was 20 years ago, no women ERGs, no women organizations. And so I felt that coming as a working mother would jeopardize my career advancement. So I really downplayed that. And, you know, I would say I consciously did. I knew I was doing it, but I didn't know the ramifications of what that would be.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to go into like the ramifications, but I want to first circle back to how does someone recognize that they're hiding? What are some of the things that they might be looking for?
I think, you know, when you sort of reflect on how you show up at work, think about, you know, are you changing your hairstyle or your clothing to match what you think the dominant culture might accept? You know, are you changing the way you talk? A lot of people change the way they speak, the words they use, uh, to conform to what's around you. Are you not talking about things at home that are really important to you, whether it's family or health issues, or, you know, and not everyone has to share everything about themselves, but, you know, if we're taking care of you know, an aging parent or other things that might be really hard, is that something, you know, are you putting all that armor up to, you know, show up at work perfect and like nothing phases you and everything is great, then you have some armor on, and that's where you kind of want to reflect on that.
Yeah. Well, but some of that I would think is normal, natural to kind of bring a different part of ourselves to different groups that we hang with.
Yes,
Where
I think that,
where does it feel healthy to you, and where do you feel like it becomes unhealthy?
yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of what I'm hearing a lot is you're not going to show up in, you know, your pajama pants at work, right? No, you know, that's not what I'm saying. And I think it's when you are not bringing a part of yourself that provides that human connection at work, whether that's in person or on Zoom. If there's something about what's going on in your life that um, that matters to you as a whole person, that you feel you're not connecting to those around you because you're keeping that a secret.
Yeah. And maybe, I mean, one of the things that I picked up in the book also is that you're afraid to let certain things be seen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, it's not, every workplace is not going to accept your authentic self. And I'm not trying to say that that's the case. You know, I think part of the book and what I try to coach people on is, one is you have to recognize you're doing it, as we started the show off. Is this something that's doing, and is it causing you some, you know, emotional harm? And the second thing is, if that's the case, is your workplace a place that will accept your authentic self? If it is, great. If it's not, are you personally have the tools to manage that if you get pushback or challenged on bringing your authentic self to the workplace? Or do you have support systems in place to help you through that, or within the organization or outside the organization? And are you in the place in your life? You know, I think we go through seasons in our life where we are able to take things on that are hard, and some seasons in our life where we can't. And so are you in a place where you have sort of the emotional space to, you know, take on some of these, you know, changes in the workplace that need to happen? But that takes a lot of work, and it's hard and lonely and frustrating. So, you know, if you've got a brand new toddler at home and are just trying to get through the day, that might not be the right time. And so then we do have to do some of these coping mechanisms until you find yourself in a place that's welcoming.
Yeah. I appreciate your discussion about handling microaggressions at work. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, can you, and just your sensitivity on and not just sensitivity, but your actual practical suggestions on how to handle these things, and how that ties into being your authentic self. Because it seems like just by being if people know who you are, that acts as a filter. I thought that was fascinating, and you know, illustrative. I felt really, of course, it made so much sense when I read that. Can you speak about
Yeah.
that a bit?
Yeah, microaggressions, if people don't know what that is, or they're, comments or little slights that, and oftentimes aren't intended to be taken in a bad way, but they relate to something about who you are. And so for me, oftentimes it was around my, being Latino, when we talk about, and it can be political, obviously, in this day and age, because, for example, the wall and immigrants coming over, all of that can be political, but they really touch on me being a first generation Latina, and my parents being immigrants. So those little comments that kind of happen in the day-to-day life that make you feel less than, they make you feel othered. And what's hard about microaggressions, if you're the recipient of them, is that they happen so fast that you don't even recognize, like, it's happening. It hurt you. We're on to the next thing before you even realize. And so part of the practice that I honestly still have to practice, because I still, for whatever reason, get kind of taken back when it happens, is just to, realize and reflect, oh, that's something that, that's not feeling good over here. And maybe I can interrupt that a little bit. And so some tactics are to, one thing would be to say, tell me more about that, or how did you come to believe that, or over here that didn't land so well. Let me explain to you why. Or I used to think that as well, but let me tell you why I think differently now. So there are little questions that you can use to help the other person sort of pause and reflect on what they said, that even though they may not have intended to cause any harm, for them to reflect on, some of those words or some of those phrases might actually cause harm to somebody.
What I like about what you're saying is that it allows those of us who may be bystanders to also kind of step up and say those things. And I
Yeah.
think that happens a lot, that a lot of people may feel uncomfortable by a particular person's comment, but
Yeah.
we don't know how to, in a kind of a neutral way, without making it what is it? Without, having it accelerate into some heated
Right.
thing.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's a very good point, Linda, because oftentimes what you don't want to do is get someone defensive, right? And so you want to just sort of have that conversation. And you're right, as a bystander, as a person in the conversation, that's allyship. That's coming in and supporting somebody from an underrepresented or historically marginalized group, for example. And that is hugely beneficial. I can't score that, because oftentimes, as the recipient of the microaggression, either we're still sort of processing it, or it's hurting us, so it's traumatic, so we don't really want to shine more light on it. And so somebody who's an ally can come in and say, hold on, let's just pause there. And some of the things I said, like, tell me more, why do you think that? And the most effective one for an ally is, I used to think what you thought, but let me tell you why I don't think that anymore.
Yeah.
Because then you're connecting with that other person about, I know, I see you, I know why you think that, but let me explain to you why I think differently now.
Yeah. And one of the things that I remember you saying, that once people knew that people didn't know you were Latina.
Yeah.
And once they knew you were Latina, they would filter themselves. They
They
wouldn't even
do.
bring it
Yeah.
into, I mean, if they were well-intentioned. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure sometimes people who are maybe unconscious or unaware, but that a lot of that, um, that kind of conversational gaffe would
Mm-hmm.
not really enter the picture. But so that may be one reason why it's good to be your authentic self, but you have many reasons why
Yes.
it's good. So let's dive into that.
Yeah, I think for some of us, we might not hide or downplay much, but for some of us, we might do downplay and hide a lot. And for some people, that's called code switching. And so that term means changing something about your appearance, your mannerism, your language to conform to the dominant culture around you. And that exercise of doing that every day, sometimes multiple times a day, it becomes emotionally and physically exhausting. It is a tremendous amount of energy. And when I'm in spaces, Linda, of women of color, and when we talk about this and share experiences of code switching, the common phrase we hear is, it's not until the end of the day when I get home and sit on the couch can I finally relax. I can finally be myself. And that is really hard and sad that we can only relax when we're at home. And so, you can do it for a while, but over time, over days, months, years, decades, it'll eventually become too much, and it'll impact, I believe, your mental health.
Yeah, yeah.
And data suggests, not just me. Data
Yes,
suggests.
yes, yes, for sure. And the other thing that I thought was really cool, and I think companies are getting to see this more, is that when you have a more diversified workforce, you are able to be more creative and innovative and sensitive in terms of branding and marketing and
Mm-hmm.
all of these things that you cannot really handle in a sensitive or thoughtful way without.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're spending all your energy just trying to fit in, first of all, you don't have the energy to be creative and innovative because you're tired. It really is emotionally exhausting. But secondly, if you don't feel comfortable bringing that identity into the workplace, and there's a reason, right, that you're not talking about something, then when that particular maybe subject matter shows up, you may not bring the valuable opinion that companies need to address a particular community. And so I think, in order for us to create products and services that serve all communities, we're a very diverse culture and society. We need those voices in the room, and we need those voices talking about what our communities need. So, for example, for me, being a Latina in California, California is 40% Latino, and in the country it's 20% Latino. So it's the largest ethnic group in the country, and yet for Latinas in particular, we're less than 1% in the C-suite, in the boardroom. So our voices aren't part of the conversation. And so how are we really addressing the needs, the products, the services of those communities if we're not in there? So it's very important for us to really embrace all of who we are and be confident in bringing those parts of our identity into the workplace.
Yeah. So, what does it take to go from hiding to showing yourself, in your opinion?
Yeah, it really depends on, I think the journey for each person is different. For me, it was long, took a couple of years because I had put on a lot of armor to really protect myself. And it's really hard to let that down. It's scary to be vulnerable. It's scary to say the thing that you've been afraid to say for a long time. And so the practice that I used was really just revealing a little bit about myself, little by little. So I call it small steps repeated often. And I would start revealing things about myself slowly in safe places. So it would start with friends, in the home, like, with friends around the table, and then at work with colleagues that, that I felt safe with, that really connected with, and then, went from there. And then, for me, it culminated in telling my personal story at my company. And when I did that, it was very scary to do, but the impact of telling my story was something I didn't expect. It was just warm, welcoming, and so many people who shared my identity said they had never seen someone like me in positions of leadership. with tears and saying, thank you, your story is my story. I now am empowered to be more myself here as well. And so I think that little by little, by telling our stories, we all learn from each other. We learn that we create empathy for each other. And so I think it's just one step at a time.
Yeah, yeah. So what were some of the things that you would share at the beginning?
Well, I would just say, yeah, I have lots of cousins in Ecuador. I have, many aunts and uncles. My dad was one of six, and he's the only one that came to the United States. And so I would talk about, I have lots of cousins and how vibrant and fun and, it is when I visit there, and just talk about them in Ecuador. I would talk about Spanish being my first language, something I never really shared before. I would actually start talking in Spanish when the opportunity arose, because I never really spoke Spanish outside of my home. So, I think people were surprised when they heard me speak Spanish. And I also changed things on my LinkedIn. My name was changed, a couple of times in my life. And so when I got married, I became, I was born Tricia Montalvo, and I became Tricia Timm. And so, my ethnicity was lost in my name. So I've included my maiden name is now my middle name. And so I started changing my LinkedIn with my name, the organizations that I was part of that were part of Hispanic National Bar Association, and other things, and just started sort of revealing more of who I was in very public places.
And so what do you feel like the outcomes were for you? What changed in terms of your feeling of success? Because that's what you're after, is for people to feel like the real success they're looking for.
I think on the personal level, it's just freedom. I mean, honestly, it's just like, it is a weight that everybody that experiences this will say and share, that it is just a weight that is lifted when you can just show up and not really worry, not go through that internal dialogue of, what do I need to be here? How should I dress? What should I say? What should I not say? That internal dialogue is exhausting. And so I think the freedom of just not worrying that people will not accept who you are is just freeing. And then I think once you can get that freedom, then you have the ability to innovate and create and contribute to not only the workplace, but to conversations. And for me, the last thing I would say is the impact. One thing that in one of the chapters I have in the book is role modeling authenticity, and how critical it is for all of us, not only to show up as our authentic selves for ourselves, but for the next generation of people or other people that are hiding. There's a story in there from a colleague of mine who's a gay Black man, and he was a very, early on, he came out early in his life and very proud of who he is. And he was doing an interview with a professor, or he was interviewing for a position with a professor. And at the end of the interview, the professor, a Black professor, said, I just learned from you. And he said, doing what? He's like, you are just who you are. You're just showing up in the world as you are. I have never been able to do this in the 25 years as a professor. And so now I have permission to do that. So by you being your authentic self, you unwittingly give others permission to be their authentic selves, because they see you walking in the world proudly.
Yes, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So for those who are watching, or if you're watching the replay, please post any questions you have or share any experiences that we can also kind of applaud you or support you on. And I also want to share how similar I see the journey that you've been on as the one that I went on to overcome my fear of speaking, because it's through my sharing of my story of being afraid to speak well into my 50s, and pushing through it, and not realizing that the pushing through it was actually making it worse, because it 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 normalized that I couldn't. It was like looking at the fear in the wrong way. So it was like I was
Hmm.
looking at the fear as an enemy, something to be gotten through, rather than
Right.
a messenger. And it's almost like, and the message was there are things that happened in the past that led me to believe it wasn't safe to speak. Just like
Okay.
there are things that happened to you that
Yeah.
led you to believe it wasn't safe to show yourself.
Right.
And
Yep.
and these things are, originate in the same way, and the way I dealt with it is different than the
Yeah.
way, you chose to deal with it. I love how you created for yourself this step-by-step process of revealing yourself. For
Hmm.
for me, I went back and I looked at each of those experiences, or that I could remember, and, it can be a lot. And
Yes.
and I worked on healing and resolving each one. And I found that, and this is how I work with my clients also, I found that once I looked at those injuries and I resolved them, so I wasn't holding on, they weren't triggering me anymore,
Right.
then I didn't feel like when I looked around me, I didn't see people as judging me. I
Yeah.
saw I realized that there was a lot more safety in my environment than I realized
Yeah.
that I knew, because before, the way I projected, uh, danger around me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. And I often, what I try to do is use a technique where I try to differentiate between fact and story. So
Mhm.
I've said, okay, my story here is that, they think X, Y, and Z. The facts are different. The facts are they've only been kind to me. They've, only supported me. What are the facts? And so you have to sort of say, okay, that might just be a story that I'm creating, and I'm going to move past it. The hard thing, what I will say though, is there are certainly those fears, and there is, I agree with you, more safety than I realized. For many people, who are people of color, there still is so much bias out there, that their story might be true, and so that's where it becomes really hard because there are real consequences, for them. So it's a really tough it's a really tough one because,
Yes.
I don't think it's easy, and for everybody it's not, the right time, to be fully their authentic selves. I think that over time, I think that's where people will, I hope, um, realize that's the only way you can really show up to have a healthy life. But it might take a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So let's look at how do we create those safer environments. So one
Hmm.
of the things I appreciate in your book is that you have strategies for managers. Let's go over some of what they can be so that indeed our environments can be more psychologically and on a human level safer.
Yeah. So at the end of each chapter, I have manager strategies, and they're there to follow the reader's journey of, so this is where the reader is, and here are some things to make them feel a little safer. So, for example, when you are, leading a meeting, uh, there's always usually some people that are super confident and kind of dominate the meeting with their voice, and some that don't. And as a manager, what you can do is notice who's not speaking up, who is quiet, most of the time, and recognize how do we bring that voice into the conversation. And while you can ask for their opinion, which is helpful, the problem is if that person always feels like they have the different opinion every time, that also becomes, they also suddenly feel like they're the other, the misfit in the room. So one thing you could do is, if a conversation is then, it's going in one direction, you can challenge the group and say, okay, looks like we're landing here. I want the group to think about, how do we do it a different way? I want to challenge the group. How do we do it the opposite way? What's a different, way to approach this? So now you challenge the entire group rather than one person to bring
Mm,
in a contrarian idea.
mhm.
So that way, the person isn't the only one that has a different idea. You've got the group throwing in different ideas. So that's a really great strategy. And when you're leading meetings, and I think, another just general practice that leaders can do within their organization is start normalizing different identities, different cultures. I think, for so many years, in my organizations, we celebrated Christmas and Easter. What about all the other celebrations that are, that people celebrate in their home? I remember at Looker, when we first created our diversity, equity, inclusion program, it was around the December timeframe. And one of the first things we sent out was a celebration of Hanukkah. And we had several employees say they had never, none of their organization had ever acknowledged Hanukkah. And they just felt seen. So really think about all the different types of celebrations and that, people in your organization might celebrate. And another program we used was called the Storyteller Program, where every month we would have a 1-hour program where somebody would tell their story. And, we would try to tie it in with either a particular, if we were celebrating a particular identity in a month, whether it be, National Hispanic Heritage Month or Pride Month. And by people telling their stories, we start learning from each other. We start realizing that we're more the same than we are different. And all those fears and unconscious biases that we've been created in our minds, they slowly start to go away. And, the colleague that you sat next to for 5 years is, a human being that you can connect with on a different level. So I think that's important too.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, we're getting to the end of the show, and I'm wondering, is there anything that you want people to remember, to think about as a closing thought?
Yeah, I know. I would say that if you are struggling to belong, struggling to fit in, and are changing something about yourself, just take a step. First of all, give yourself grace. You're doing it for a reason. There are some trauma that's happened in your life that makes you feel like you have to do that, and that's okay. We all go through that, and take small steps towards really reclaiming that part of yourself. It's a beautiful part of who you are, and the world needs to hear and see the whole of you. And so I encourage people to go on that journey with me. And then if you do have a real solid sense of belonging, what can you do as an ally and as a leader to create more spaces of belonging, psychological safety? We need you to actively interrupt bias when you see it, and actively support underrepresented voices, because we need all of us to be together on this journey to create more spaces of belonging.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Tricia. Well, I hope everybody goes out and gets your book, Embrace the Power of You. It's
And
beautifully. Oh, thank you.
your
Thank you. Delight in the Limelight. Yes. Yeah, I think that, if you are struggling in any way to be your authentic self, it's just fabulous. It's great storytelling. It's wonderfully laid out in terms of being, helpful in what you can do, both for yourself as an individual and also for others, as you said, as an ally or a manager. So thank you for that, and go out and get that, everyone. And so where can people find you?
They can find me on triciatimm.com. That's TRICIATIMM. There you have it. .com. And my book is available in all bookstores. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, indie bookstores, and it's available on audio and Kindle too.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yes,
I really
thank
appreciate it.
you. Thanks for
And
having me, Linda.
you're most welcome. And if you are struggling with speaking confidence and you want to get to a place where you can delight in the limelight, check out my book, Delight in the Limelight, or the podcast, the Delight in the Limelight podcast show. And until next time, we are wishing you speaking confidence in all that you do. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.